Hi, I'm Erik Voss, and Solo: A Star Wars Story answered all the questions we've had about the galaxy's coolest scoundrel. How did Han get the name Solo? How did he meet Chewbacca? Is space gas really a spice? Look, whatever you thought about Solo, you cannot deny that this movie was filled with connections to the Star Wars universe, many of them super subtle. And for me, rewatching the film to spot them all gave me a whole new way to appreciate it. Like, sure, it's Solo, but it's also a Star Wars story. And boy, is it fun to discover how much of a Star Wars story it is. So let's go back through Solo scene by scene and find all the stuff that you might have missed the first time around. And spoiler warning for the moof milkers who clicked on this without seeing the movie first, so let's get started. The movie opens with no Star Wars opening crawl and fanfare because, like Rogue One, it is a Star Wars story and not a chapter of the main Skywalker narrative. And instead, we open on Han Solo's homeworld of Corellia. Young Han, played by Alden Ehrenreich, steals this M68 land speeder, gliding under an Imperial Star Destroyer as it's being built, along with TIE fighters under construction in all these factories. And we get our first nod at the past Star Wars films, Han's golden dice. These lucky dice were a set design addition from the very first Star Wars, hanging from the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. Recently, in The Last Jedi, the dice came back. Luke retrieved them from the Falcon and brought them back to Leia. And then they faded away in Kylo's hand along with the rest of Luke's force projection. Two young runaway scavengers Han passes brag about getting extra portions for their loot. Portions was how tiny amounts of currency was described in The Force Awakens.
1/2 portion.
Last week they were a half portion each.
When Han runs into Malak, he lies that he was just on his way to see Lady Proxima. This echoes the moment when Han accidentally ran into Greedo in Star Wars.
Yes, Greedo. As a matter of fact, I was just going to see your boss.
When Han faces Lady Proxima, he threatens her with what he says is a thermal detonator. Leia used one of those to threaten Jabba in Return of the Jedi. Now Han uses this rock-shaped thermal detonator to break a window and flood the room with light, allowing him to escape in the stolen speeder. And this whole chase is very reminiscent of the street chases in the movie American Graffiti, the success of which led George Lucas to be able to make Star Wars. Lucas, Harrison Ford, and this movie's new director, Ron Howard, all work together in this movie. Escaping with Han is his lifelong friend Kira, played by Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones. Now, the name Kira was actually the original name of Rey, back when it was spelled K-I-R-A, according to concept art for The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. During the chase, Han and his pursuers obliterate an Imperial RA-7 protocol droid with one of those dome-helmeted Imperial Navy officers behind him, both of which have appeared in past films. And a stormtrooper chases Han on a swoop bike. Now, we've seen those show up in various Star Wars stories as well. And right before Han flips the speeder sideways to squeeze through the alley, he confidently says, "Watch this." This is something Han says in Empire Strikes Back right before he similarly blows it.
Oh yeah? Watch this.
Watch what?
In line at the spaceport, Kira makes this movie's first mention of the Crimson Dawn and the Hutt cartel, worried they'll get sold into slavery to those groups. Crimson Dawn is the name of the crime organization she later joins, and the Hutt cartel is, of course, the group that Jabba is a part of on Tatooine. After breaking through, Han spots an Imperial recruitment video featuring a more upbeat version of John Williams' Imperial March. This is the first time any Star Wars music has been featured in a diegetic way in the world of the story. The recruitment officer gives Han the name Solo, and he's off to Mimban, the swamp planet under Imperial attack. We see new versions of stormtroopers, the Mud Troopers, and an AT-ST. Here, Han meets Tobias Beckett, Woody Harrelson, and his partner Val, Tandy Newton from Westworld, and Rio Durant, voiced by Jon Favreau, who's actually currently directing his own Star Wars live-action series for Disney. Han brags to Beckett that he was boosting AV-21s when he was 10. The AV-21 is actually a rare hand-built land speeder that showed up in the game Star Wars Galaxies. He also tells the group that he was kicked out of the Imperial Academy. This is parallel to Han's original origin story from the Legends stories. Now, we were actually supposed to see what Han did to get kicked out, with the scene that showed Han escorted out of a courtroom by Legends characters Tag and Bink. They were played by one of the screenwriters of this movie, John Kasdan, and assistant director Toby Hefferman, but Ron Howard decided to delete the scene. Beckett gets Han thrown in a pit to get fed to a beast, a death sequence that's very similar to the way Jabba threw Luke in the Rancor pit in Return of the Jedi. But this beast turns out to be a friendly one, Chewbacca. Han reveals that he can actually speak the Wookiee language and end up befriending Chewbacca in what seems like a very brief courtship. And he calls him a mangy Kashyyykin moof milker, which is a nod to Han's line in The Force Awakens.
Some moof milker put a compressor on the ignition line.
Unkar plucked it.
The two escape, and we move on to Vandor, where the team plots their heist of the coaxium fuel from the Convex. Val is annoyed that they've added Han and Chewie to their team, and she suggests that they recruit better criminals, like the Zan sisters, or BOSSK. The Zan sisters sisters refer to Zu and Zan PIKE, twin sisters from the book Shadows of the Empire. They were affiliated with Black Sun, which is the same crime organization that Maul interacted with in Clone Wars. And BOSSK was a bounty hunter from Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. He's appeared throughout the animated series and the games as well. Beckett reassures Val by promising that they're going to retire and return to GLEE ANSELM. That is his home world, which came up in Legends as well and in Clone Wars. He also mentioned wanting to learn to play the VALACHORD. That is a musical instrument in the Star Wars universe that's similar to a keyboard. It shows up in Aftermath. During this whole campfire, Rio refers to Mynock roasts of Aldrenia. Mynocks were those critters in the Exogorth cave in Empire Strikes Back. Apparently they are delicious. Chewie mentions the Empire enslaving the Wookiees on Kashyyyk, which was Chewie's previous backstory and something that we did see in Revenge of the Sith and in the animated series. We also learn the origin of Han's blaster. It was tossed to him by Beckett. During this conveyance heist, Rio says that he wants to open a cantina someplace warm. His dream retirement plan sounds a lot like the cantina in Mos Eisley on Tatooine. This conveyance heist is disrupted by Enfys, Nest, and the Marauders, also known as the Cloud Riders. Now, the Cloud Riders is the name of a group of bandits from the Marvel Star Wars comics, which sets them up in this movie to be pretty bad dudes, until later when we learn what their true motives are. Now, this whole plan goes to hell. Val and Rio die, and the tug of war over the coaxium causes the loot to detonate, blow up a mountain. Beckett, Han, and Chewie head to the yacht of Dryden Voss and the Crimson Dawn. Now, I explained what the Crimson Dawn is and the meaning of their symbol over in my video about the mall scene, so go check out that video. Dryden's club features a dancing Twi'lek girl. Jabba had one of those in Return of the Jedi. You can also see a servant with the top half of its head missing. These types are called decraniated. They are lobotomized android slaves that were originally going to appear in Rogue One. They're actually freak experiments by Dr. Ebbeson. That was the a-hole plastic surgeon that Luke scuffled with in Mos Eisley, and he has showed up in Rogue One bumping into Jyn on Jedha. Now, Dryden's suite is littered with Easter eggs. Among his collection are a bunch of clues for the Maul reveal later. There's a Sith holocron, probably given to him by Maul himself, as well as a set of Mandalorian armor with a red color. This could be a nod to the Death Watch. That's a group of Mandalorian Jedi killers from the Clone Wars series, some of which wore red armor to show allegiance to Maul. Fun detail here, there's also the golden fertility idol, the one from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And speaking of Indiana Jones, someone pointed out that Crystal Skull, which is a reference but not to Indiana Jones. It's from the Star Wars Legends story Han Solo and the Lost Legacy. Kira lists possible locations of coaxium, including Scarif. Scarif was the name of the Imperial Vault planet from Rogue One. And they realize unrefined coaxium is on Kessel, which Dryden says is run by the Pikes. The Pike Syndicate is another one of the crime organizations from Clone Wars that Maul interacts with. But in order to pull this off, they need a fast ship, which brings them to Lando Calrissian, played by Donald Glover. Han finds him in the middle of a game of Sabacc, the gambling game, which, according to Legends, Han did win the Falcon from Lando. But this particular game, at this point in the movie, is not the one that he wins the Falcon in. That comes at the end of the movie. And just to fill you in, because I think their names are stupid and ridiculous, the other players at this table are Argus Six Eyes Panox and Therm Scissor Punch. Now, this Sabacc scene was one of my favorites in the movie. It's like every line has some meaningful subtext to it. Notice the first exchange between Han and Lando.
The seat taken?
Nobody's in the seat, then I ain't taking, friend.
Lando's response foreshadows the way Han will later take his seat as captain of the Millennium Falcon. Lando will later vacate the captain's chair while he's wounded and grieving L3. And then, yeah, Han takes the wheel from that point forward, claiming the Falcon as his. And then as they size each other up, there's this exchange.
So this is, Sabacc?
Sabacc.
Sabacc.
Han is using the classic poker strategy. You know, play the rookie, act like you're in over your head, and then take advantage of the people for underestimating you. But then notice what Lando says.
Can I ask you a question, Captain Calrissian?
Anything, Han? It's Han, but that's okay.
Lando is deliberately mispronouncing Han's name, showing Han that he is onto his accidental mispronouncing trick. And yeah, you could also say this is explaining the origin of Billy D. Williams' Lando saying Han's name like this.
Princess, we'll find Han. I promise.
And as Lando sips his drink, he says this.
Everything you've heard about me is true.
And Han will later repeat these words to Rey in The Force Awakens, verifying the whole legend versus the man thing.
It's true. The Force, the Jedi. All of it.
Lando also brags about having won a subtropical moon on the Ocean Belt. This is a reference to the Legends novel Lando Calrissian and the Flame Wind of Ocean, where the Ocean system is known for its wealthy inhabitants and tourism. While baiting Lando into betting the Falcon, Han says he pilots a VCX-100. That's a reference to Star Wars Rebels. That's actually the line of starfighter that Ghost belongs to. One of those also showed up in Rogue One. After the game, Lando tells Qi'ra that he assumed his debt was settled with the Crimson Dawn after he did the whole Felucia thing. Now, Felucia is the name of a colorful Outer Rim jungle planet. We actually saw it in Revenge of the Sith. That was where the Twilight Jedi Aayla Secura was executed under Order 66. And then Beckett shows up and Lando credits him as the guy who killed Aurra Sing. Beckett says he pushed her. Now, Aurra Sing was an albino bounty hunter who made a brief cameo in Phantom Menace, and she later played a much bigger role in Clone Wars. Meanwhile, over at the droid fighting ring, we meet Lando's temperamental droid, L337, voiced by actress Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Now, the name L337 is actually a reference to Leet. That was the old school computer language. And yeah, the grimy ringmaster is a cameo by Ron Howard's brother, Clint Howard. He makes a cameo in all of Ron Howard's movies. As they head over to the Falcon, L3 snaps at Lando, "You couldn't make it from here to Black Spire without me." Now that sounds like a reference to the Black Spire Outpost. That's the name of the upcoming Star Wars themed section of the Disneyland park. When L3 and Lando break them into the shipyard and they come upon the Millennium Falcon, you can hear a swell of John Williams' main Star Wars theme. This is actually the first time it plays during the movie. And on board the Falcon, L3 complains that her circuits are sticking, telling Lando he's gonna have to do that thing again later. Now, when asked about this moment, the screenwriters confirm that Lando is pansexual, meaning he is not limited in sexual choice with regard to sex or gender identity, or in this case, human or droid. While in hyperspace, Beckett and Chewbacca play the Falcon's hollow chess game to Jarek, just like Chewie will later do with 3PO in the very first movie. And a promo tour of the Falcon before the movie came out revealed that the vessel contains a model of Cloud City for Lando's future colony. Lando also has a closet just for his many capes. The scene between Han and Qi'ra here definitely echoes the moment Han cornered Leia on the Falcon and nearly kissed her in Empire. Moving on to Kessel, the mining planet operated by the PIKE Syndicate. Now, the disguise worn by Beckett should look familiar to you. This is the helmet and guard uniform worn by Lando in the opening rescue sequence from Jabba in Return of the Jedi. In the elevator shaft on the way down the mines, Chewie rips off a guy's arm. Now, this is delivering on a promise that the movies made to us way back in the first Star Wars.
It's not wise to upset a Wookiee.
But sir, nobody worries about upsetting a droid.
It's because a droid don't pull people's arms out of their sockets when they lose.
Now, The Force Awakens almost showed a version of this with a deleted scene showing Chewbacca ripping off Unkar Plutt's arm. When Qi'ra takes down a few of the PIKE guards, she tells L3 the martial arts style was Teras Kasi. This is another big clue pointing to the later reveal of Darth Maul at the end of the movie. Teras Kasi is the hand-to-hand combat style from Star Wars Legends, and Maul is one of the most well-known practitioners of it. L3 removes a restraining bolt from one of the droids in the command center. We saw Luke do this to R2 in Star Wars. Now, the riot that ensues allows Han and the rest to escape with unrefined coaxium, and among this chaos we can see a bipedal gonk droid. And even though this is the only Star Wars movie to not feature appearances from R2-D2 and C-3PO, we do see a few astromech droids in the style of R2, and an in-person cameo by 3PO actor Anthony Daniels. He is the guy who helps Chewbacca's Wookiee friend. And while the others are doing all this grunt work, Lando reclines on the Falcon, recording his memoirs. He refers to his time on Sharu, which is a nod to another Lando Legends novel, Lando Calrissian in the Mind Harp of Sharu. And as they load the coaxium on the ship, notice how the camera lingers on this hidden cargo hold. This is the same exact spot where Han, Luke, and Chewie and the rest hide after the Falcon got detained by the Death Star, and later the place where Rey and Finn hide from them in The Force Awakens. As they depart from Kessel, an Imperial Star Destroyer blocks their path, and we see a swarm of the new TIE fighters of this movie. These are the TIE RBs, or heavy TIE fighters, known for a more powerful laser cannon and an extra pod. This forces them to take a dangerous shortcut through the already dangerous Kessel Run, filling in the backstory for the iconic line from the first movie.
You've never heard of the Millennium Falcon?
Should I have?
It's the ship that made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs.
Now, the reason the Falcon was supposedly able to do this isn't necessarily its speed, but its superior navigational system. And that's what's really cool about Solo. We learned where this advanced navigation came from, L3. Earlier in the movie, Lando bragged about L3's navigation database, so they upload her drive into the Falcon's computer, basically endowing the Falcon with L3's intelligence and personality. It could explain why Han and Lando have always referred to the vessel as she, and why C-3PO has this reaction to the Falcon in Empire.
Sir, I don't know where your ship learned to communicate, but it has the most peculiar dialect.
So really, L3 is to thank for Han completing the Kessel Run in under 12 parsecs, or rounded down at least. And right before he does, he says, I got a really good feeling about this. This is the closest this movie gets to the classic Star Wars line, I have a bad feeling about this. And I guess that kind of makes sense, because Han is still young, and he's optimistic, and he doesn't really have bad feelings yet. During this sequence, Han loses the Falcon's radar dish. It's a nod to getting knocked off in Return of the Jedi. That freaking dish never stays on. And we learn how the Falcon loses that missing chunk of its nose piece. Han releases the escape pod. Chewie also reveals that he's 190 years old, placing his age around 230 during the events of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. Han also mentions an old buddy from Corellia named Needles, who taught him a street racing trick that actually led to Needles dying in a crash. That sounds like a reference to the Back to the Future movies. Needles is a character who challenges Marty McFly to a street race that could have messed up Marty pretty bad. After outrunning the TIE fighters, they run into this massive tentacled monster whose huge eye blinks in front of their cockpit. A similar moment happens in the submarine in The Phantom Menace, in that there's always the bigger fish sequence. They lure the monster into a giant gravity well called the Maw. Now the Maw is actually a detail from the 1994 novel Jedi Search from the Jedi Academy book series. The crew escapes by the skin of their teeth, and we move on to the dunes of Savareen. As Han and Lando overlook the wreckage of the Falcon, Lando says, I hate you, and Han responds with the perfect callback.
I know.
Or I guess it's a call forward, technically. And then we see the return of the Marauders and Enfys Nest, and Han steps up to them with this awesome gunslinger framed shot with a close-up of his blaster. Now, the framing here actually seems like a specific homage to the shot in the first Star Wars, where Han comes up on Jabba at the Falcon and Mos Eisley. By the way, this is the original footage with the stand-in of Jabba that was omitted from the original release. Lucas later digitally inserted Jabba and included this scene in the special edition. Now, among these Marauders are a few familiar faces. One of them is Benthic Two Tubes. He and his brother were part of the partisan rebel group on Jedha. That was group led by Saw Gerrera in Rogue One. Another is a cameo by character actor Warwick Davis. He has made a cameo in pretty much every Star Wars movie. He actually could be the same character that he played in The Phantom Menace, Weasel. That was the pod racing spectator. Enfys Nest reveals the Marauders are more than criminals and killers. They're actually a grassroots gang of Robin Hood-style protectors of innocence that the Crimson Dawn terrorizes. They're one of the many groups scattered across the galaxy that are gradually leading to the rebellion. And while Han and the crew weigh whether to help them, Beckett mentions a big shot gangster putting together a crew on Tatooine. He is, of course, referring to Jabba, presumably the deal that Han will get stuck in, leading up to the events of A New Hope. They return to Dryden Voss, and Han pulls a double switcheroo on him, first assuming that Dryden will think the coaxium is fake, Han anticipating Beckett betraying him, and then tricking him again with it actually being the real stuff. Actually, during the scene, Dryden offers them some seafood, Kolo clawfish. This is a smaller sample of the fish in Naboo that attack Qui-Gon and the others in that scene that I mentioned earlier. As Beckett leaves with the coaxium, Dryden says, you're making a big mistake. Beckett says, it won't be my first. Dryden says, it will be your last. And then Beckett responds, maybe. This could be a nod to The Last Jedi. Remember Benicio del Toro's character, DJ. His final line as he took off with his loot, maybe. I know, I guess the two of them are pretty similar characters. They're morally ambiguous scoundrels who put themselves before all else. In the melee that ensues, we see Dryden's weapons, which actually look very similar to those of the Praetorian Guard in The Last Jedi. But I also think it's possible that the dual-bladed design of these brass knuckles could be Dryden's way of paying tribute to Darth Maul's dual-wield lightsaber. Actually get into all of these Darth Maul clues, plus the significance of Maul's appearance in this movie and his relationship to Kira and the Crimson Dawn, all in my other Darth Maul video. Go check that out. I explain the reference to the planet Dathomir that he mentions, and where, if you listen closely, you can hear John Williams sneak in the Duel of the Fates in the score. But in the final confrontation between Han and Beckett, it was nice to see Han cut off Beckett's final monologue by shooting first. This brings Han full circle with the deadly killer that he was in the theatrical release of Star Wars, a guy who shot and killed Greedo and didn't wait for Greedo to shoot first. In the final scene, Han and Chewie catch up with Lando, giving us the actual legendary game of sabacc, in which Han won the Falcon. During the scene, Lando mentions the Star Cave Nebula, which is another Legends reference, the book Lando Calrissian in the Star Cave of Thonboka. And then after winning the hand, Han taunts Lando, fair and square, baby, fair and square, giving us one last nod to the original trilogy.
Hey, remember, you lost her to me fair and square.
And as he and Chewie commandeer the controls of the Falcon, heading to work for Jabba most likely, the movie closes with one final shot of Han's lucky golden dice, a representation of the gambler who throws caution to the wind and somehow, usually, gets away with it. But a question for you guys, which character in this movie do you think was the most accurate to the memory of the character? Han, Chewie, or Lando? In general, I think the acting in this movie is being a little unfairly maligned, and I liked all the performances, but really, Chewbacca didn't miss a beat. I love that walking carpet. I just want to take a nap curled up in his lap. Comment down below with your thoughts and tweet me directly at EA Voss or follow New Rockstars on Twitter for updates on our videos. Like and share this video, subscribe to New Rockstars for all of our Star Wars deep dives. Though, you know, it's probably gonna be a while since we got like a full year and a half until episode 9 comes out. Until then, I guess I'll just wait for adventure to call. Are you putting in the sunsets? Binary sunset? Bye.